Howdy, folks. Welcome to Catalyst Energies. My name is Dee. Thank you for joining me. I am so grateful that you are here. Scorpio, welcome to your new moon forecast. We're going to be looking at the main astrological themes for the next 2 weeks from our new moon in Scorpio on the 13th of November up to our Gemini full moon on the 27th of November. So this transmission, this forecast is for primarily the Scorpio rising, Scorpio moon, and Scorpio sun folks. But anybody with strong Scorpio there's going to be some value here for all of us. And I say us because I'm also a Scorpio moon. I have a stellium, which is 3 or more bodies in a sign in Scorpio. So I am 100% with you folks as I give this transmission. So welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being here. I really, really, truly appreciate you so very much. I am recording this on Sunday the 12th, and it's already been just like, so intense. And now the moon is in Scorpio. We're leading up to our new moon, which will be at 4:30 a.m. Eastern on Monday the 13th. So we're still technically in the balsamic moon phase, but the moon is now in the sign of Scorpio. And being that I am a moon and Scorpio person, I'm really feeling it right now. So and unfortunately Mercury is now in Sagittarius, and I can really tell, even though I also have a stellium in Sagittarius, Mercury is at its detriment. So facts and patterns and lists and, just keeping track of things in a logical and rational fashion, maybe like bullet points of things, not doing so well. And I had to literally put a bullet point list up to keep myself like on task, because Mercury in Sagittarius is not exactly at its best and doesn't want to synthesize material, but definitely wants to tell a story. And sometimes it can just be a rambly story. So I made a list, and hopefully that'll keep us on track right now. So the transmission itself, like the essence of it, is not a problem at all. Like, it's coming through loud and clear on multiple levels right now, but keeping it in a format that I want to transmit and that you want to listen to has been quite the challenge this morning. So let's just start with the bullet points, shall we? And of course, if you're new here and this is your first time here, thank you for being here. And if you do listen through this and you're like, that's pretty cool, I like that, you know what to do, right? Interact with the content. It helps the channel grow. It helps more people find it through their feed and the algorithm. And I would appreciate that if that's something that you feel called to do. So, Scorpio people, Scorpio sun, Scorpio moon, Scorpio rising. Let's get into it. So, there are a number of key things I'm going to point out, and then we do the play by play. So I do these videos, as many of you probably already know. I do a new moon and full moon forecast for the sign that the new moon and full moon are in every month, and give you an idea of how my work goes when I read for people, and also too to just show you how to read your own chart and to understand the dynamics at play in the astrological template, right? The architecture of the cosmos through space and time. So, Scorpio, first and foremost, our new moon in your sign is not only in conjunction with Mars, right, which is one of your planetary rulers. So, there's been a lot of just push in terms of the person you project out into the world, right? And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like, Scorpio. But really, the big thing, as you can see, this glaring red triangle in the new moon chart, is that the new moon and Mars are in an opposition to Uranus in Taurus, and they're in a T-square with this little symbol up here, which is Black Moon Lilith. And for those of you who don't know, Black Moon Lilith in astrology marks the lunar apogee. It is a space. It is the furthest point away from the Earth that the moon can inhabit in its orbit. And in astrology, this has a connection to the dark feminine. It is a very primal type of power. And the fact that this new moon with Uranus is wrapped up with Black Moon Lilith at the same time, there's a lot of intensity going on right now, especially for a type of person like a Scorpio person who is so driven by what can be generated, whether it's power or resource or progeny or just any type of energy, really, whatever can be generated in terms of that power, that's what's driving the identity and the creativity and even the feeling and the emotional landscape of the Scorpio person, right? And Mars is your planetary ruler, one of them. So is also right here with this new moon. So there is a lot of drive, and it's in the relationship that I think that Scorpio person is going to learn the most, even though it's also going to be the unexpected changes and rapid upheavals in relationship or in the Scorpio person because of changes in relationship that are going to really bring out a response that perhaps will fulfill that primal urge to release something in the public sphere, right? To perform, to let one's passion really be released into the social atmosphere, right? The 10th house, your career, your mission. I would say though that I would like to focus on in this forecast what's going on down in the 4th house. Where does your power come from, Scorpio? Because it's one thing for you to commit to something because of your identity and how strongly identified you are with that feeling, Scorpio. It's going to be how that unfolds, because a new moon is where we set intentions for the growth of a cycle, a personal development cycle over the next 4 weeks. And this new moon has got some surprises, and those surprises are really going to lead people into a place of satisfying that primal urge in that way. But because they're unexpected, because there's such a strong need to identify as an individual for Scorpio people with this communal situation, there's just a lot to talk about, and specifically bringing the energy and attention back down to this 4th house. Where does your power really come from? Where is your root system? What's the quality of your root system? What is the quality of your home and family life? Where do you feel emotionally safe and secure? Where do you belong? Where your loyalties lie? Because that all happens in the 4th house. And in Aquarius, that's the territory that Uranus rules. So there's something very, and the ghost point of this T-square. So we're going to talk about that. Venus is in Libra now, and this is one of the home territories of Venus. And for the Scorpio rising, it's in the 12th house. It is in the house of endings. The thing that really struck me about Venus in Libra in the 12th house right now, the phrase that came to mind was, she is clearing the decks karmically, but it's going to be a very, I don't want to say linear, but almost clerical, almost sterile. Libra is about symmetry, and it's about symmetry in material reality. And what is put in is what is generated. There is what you put in has an equal and opposite reaction, right? We're talking about material physics in some ways. And Venus does rule what is material. She rules Taurus, what is valuable, what is inherently valuable. So when she's in the 12th house like this, there is this sense of value, self-worth, and a sensitivity to justice and fairness and balance in the house of ending. So she's clearing the decks, and it may not exactly be the most comfortable or the align with and certainly I think it's going to bring, when Venus comes into opposition with Chiron later, I think it's going to be a lot more on the surface about those things. But there is something to be said for Venus in the 12th right now, and clearing some sort of karmic deck and a sense of inherent value and worth that in terms of relationship, like the relationship itself may be going through and continue to go through all these upheavals and changes and things you don't expect. And we're talking about retrogrades over in Taurus, and maybe it does drive this primal urge within you to release yourself into the public sphere, whatever that is for you, and to fulfill something very spiritual, something that means something to you. And I'm not saying that those things, the thing is that in the 12th house, there's just a sensitivity to what that brings out for the Scorpio person. I feel like there is a clearing of decks that's here to keep in mind over the next 2 weeks, specifically right after this new moon with Mercury. And speaking of Mercury, Mercury is now in Sagittarius. So Mercury is at its detriment here. It is at in a sign that it is the least powerful. Mercury wants to be just about the facts. Mercury is about logic and reason, riding the light beam. It is not about the wisdom of alchemy. That is not what Mercury is. Mercury is empirical observation, data collection, right? It is about pattern, and it is pattern recognition, obviously, but it's not about wisdom. And so Mercury is not very, very strong in Sagittarius, and that's going to be a real detriment in terms of the Scorpio. The mental realm that goes along with all those kind of mercurial activities right now is not going to be very strong when it comes to an asset and a resource that you utilize. And there's a moment where this Venus sextile Mercury that's coming right after this new moon will kind of be a boost in that area, because there aren't going to be much left to help Mercury be in Sagittarius, because Mercury doesn't want to synthesize concepts into wisdom and belief. Mercury just wants to be about the facts. And I wouldn't rely, Scorpio, I just wouldn't rely too much on that capacity, especially because your ruling planet of Pluto is in the third house of your perception, and it's just destroying your perception by destroying society. So it's a lot more about you, how you're performing yourself right now, which is the fifth house, and we're going to talk about that now, and ultimately what you're learning from relationship and how that's changing the story that you are telling about yourself. Okay, which is what every new moon really starts with in that sign, is like setting intentions about the person you're projecting into the world. Now, let's talk about Saturn and Neptune, because this is part of it too, because every time something comes into Sagittarius in the next 2 weeks, they're going to square Saturn, and this is going to be hitting a brick wall over and over and over, and it's twofold here, okay? So for the Scorpio person, having the fifth house of Pisces, having Pisces as the fifth house, especially with Neptune. Neptune's been here for years. Neptune is the planet that rules this sign. Neptune is the amorphous primal soup. It is the Akashic records. It is the divine source in its full experience. We surrender to it. We merge with it. This is where we get inspiration, imagination. This is the Bardo, the astral realm, whatever you want to call it, right? The sublime. That's what they call it in Westworld when they store all the digital consciousnesses in a server that is stored at the Hoover Dam. They called it the sublime, right? So for the Scorpio person, Neptune being here for years has really allowed for a very sublime and very idealistic, humanitarian, transcendental experience of creative expression. So fifth house is how you perform yourself, right? And it motivates you. It's where your passion is ignited, and it's your kundalini moving through you, right? So whether that's whatever brings you joy and excitement, your children that instills you with pride and joy, whatever it is, your creative activities, romance and dating is fifth house as well. This is about the individual performing themselves in creative, authentic expression, your heart resonant with your creator, for instance, right? The kundalini being released and moved through, and there's a sense of like illumination, right? Just like a sun or a star. That's what the fifth house is ruled by, is our sun. Neptune being here has been great for stimulating imagination, really blending the fantasy with reality in order to be inspired. This has been really great for those of you who have been taking this and utilizing it for years now. And so Saturn finally stationing direct in this area and staying here for the rest of up until 2026, when Neptune and Saturn are conjunct. It's 0 degrees Aries. Now that Saturn's here, it's either going to provide the structure and really crystallize what otherwise had been just pure inspiration into something really tangible, something that has a form, and create a discipline and a structure for it. But if Neptune in the fifth house has been the fantastical expression of a false self, or something completely delusional, or just not grounded in reality at all, Saturn coming into this area is going to be that kind of just like, okay, well, it's a reality check. So, and it's how you're performing yourself. And so eventually the sun and Mars and the moon are all going to be in a trine to Neptune. And that's going to have some important moments of stimulating that creativity and that imagination and connecting you as a person to that creative expression of you as part of something that is infinite, right? Part of your creation, part of divine source, part of humanity, right? In a very direct way. It's Saturn. Every time there's going to be the square to Saturn in this area between Mars and the sun and the moon, and Mercury's already done it, that's going to be like, wow, but, here's the brick wall in terms of your resources in order to be able to perform oneself. Man, it's going to be pretty intense. So those are the main things that drew my attention. So let's now start with the play-by-play, starting with the new moon itself. So the Sabian symbol, 21 degrees Scorpio. So we round up for Sabian symbols. And the Sabian symbol has to do with a soldier obeying his conscience and resisting orders. Now listen, a readiness to face the results of a refusal to follow. It's not just the not following the authoritarian pattern. It's the conscious awareness and readiness to face the outcome of that conflict. The conflict between individual sense of value and demands of society. And the thing about a Scorpio person is that the demands of society, or the drive to get at something deeper or more powerful, is going to overtake the personal ego in a lot of cases, and with especially Mars, right? Take over. The Scorpio person is more capable of just hopping over their own ego in the equation in general, like so much more comfortable with letting the ego die for the sake of the communal relationship, that it's very easy to not even allow yourself to develop that ego and identity projection to begin with, which for the Scorpio rising, lo and behold, is the 6th house, the house where you have to get your shit together. And for the Scorpio person, the realm where you get your shit together is also ruled by Mars. And so you have to have instinctual spontaneity that is an individual sense of value to begin with, that is mastered within yourself in order to know your inherent worth in relationship. Otherwise, you just give yourself over and allow yourself to generate power without being yourself empowered at an individual level. And this is how people get pulled into cults. I feel like even just in the preparation for this, and being a Scorpio person, I'm having to realize it myself, right? I feel like Scorpio people are just as open to being pulled into these situations as they are being the people that run them. You know what I mean? So you have to facing the readiness to face the refusal of those patterns when maybe you've been very trained and entrained, or programmed, or basically mind washed in some ways to accept those particular parameters in order to gain more, right? You may wake up to that and be like, I'm not doing that. But I would say, again, as I talked about, come back down to that 4th house, right? What Uranus rules and where your power comes from is going to be a really important thing to start thinking about, Scorpio. Now, let's talk about what all of these oppositions to Uranus really look like at the new moon. So when the moon is opposite Uranus, it creates a strong need for independence that contradicts your need for emotional support. And that's going to be a big part of the way that you identify, you project yourself, is this scorpionic energy. And Uranus is the thing is, Uranus over in the house of relationship is going to, there's going to be, I think, a lot of Scorpio people that are going to have to start really dealing with the changes that need to happen in their relationships, and get realistic about themselves and their individual sense of value, in order to be able to have the capacity to refuse those orders. You know what I mean? Like, there's just going to be a lot, and certainly a lot of uncertainty and a lot of stress and mood swings and emotional detachment, a lot of anxiety, a subconscious need for change. That's the other thing too. I think Scorpio people are going to be like, okay, I've had enough. Like, I have put myself completely into this situation. I've projected myself out into the situation and been one with everything, and performed myself as if I was that. And where is it getting me? I need to change something, or something needs to change, or I need stimulation. And that's especially with the moon opposite Uranus. It is really important that you don't overreact or rebel, and allow yourself the flexibility and adaptability to kind of roll with the punches, especially in relationship, but not get yourself kind of worked up into taking drastic action. Now, the moon is also going to be conjunct Mars, which is the ruling planet of Scorpio. And so there's impulsiveness, there's impatience that's going to be even more aggravated in terms of who you are, Scorpio, and not being able to relax. This is going to take some serious self-control here in order to make the most of your initiative and enthusiasm and courage to meet your desires, to stand up for yourself and your family, and to not get pulled into impulsive decisions that, are you acting rashly and are really bringing danger from risk taking, because your reflexes are so much stronger, especially the moon conjunct Mars and the fact that it's in Scorpio. Those reflexes are going to be towards relationship in some way, I feel like, or at least projecting yourself into them. Now, the sun opposite Uranus, which is the layers here are so, they're just so fantastic. When the sun is opposite of Uranus, it's really pushing you. So there's a subconscious urge for impulsivity. You have Mars that's aggravating it. Okay, so Scorpio people are going themselves feel impulsive and wanting to take action, have this urge to try new and exciting things, having an impact on your relationships, and you may even anticipating something new on the horizon and have these unsettled feelings. Again, learning to adapt, be flexible, roll with the punches, have an open mind. Know that, sometimes it's exciting opportunities. Other times it's going to trigger you into acting out or rebelling that then could cause some problems in your life as well. Odd behavior or radical about face in someone close to you may cause anxiety too. Arguments or separation. So Scorpio, especially Scorpio people, we're all going to be dealing with this. But especially in Scorpio and Taurus, but for the Scorpio people, I really see that this is going to bring itself up into relationship land, and somebody might make an about face that you didn't anticipate, and it's going to throw your whole world into some sort of identity crisis. That very well could be. Or somebody comes into your life, causes a bunch of havoc, and then leaves just as quickly as they came. So if you don't let your ego get the better of you, or Scorpio, if you don't sublimate it completely and just forget that you exist, you may realize something about yourself from that situation that needs to be addressed before we get to the full moon, which will be in your 8th house. You don't want Scorpio. I mean, of all people, truly, having the full moon in your 8th house is probably, or in the Scorpio rising 8th house is, you're the most adept to be dealing with that, full illumination of the shadow self in the house of the shadow. But just so you know, like, you want to get on top of it now so that when that happens, you are not like completely sideswiped about it. So, and I don't think that'll happen. I think there's too much with Uranus involved with this new moon in Scorpio that's going to be like, well, the shit's changing now. So just be aware of how radically things can change in a heartbeat, right? And that changes you because of it. So this is where Mercury and Venus in their sextile, I talked about both of them in general being in these areas. So Venus is at her strength and Mercury is at its detriment. So there's something that I think spiritually, kind of in this transcendent space, maybe kind of tapping more into like more of a compassionate or position when it comes to Venus and Libra. I think this is really going to assist in the communication skills by midweek for the Scorpio person, okay? So what I have here in terms of when they are exactly conjunct looks like, or sextile, I'm sorry, when they're exactly sextile, uh, it looks like it's 8 degrees. Yes, 7 to 8 degrees. So 7 to 8 degrees Libra is a blazing fire in a deserted, like in a fireplace in a deserted cabin, right? And 7 to 8 degrees Sagittarius. Oh, that is an amazing. That's a very important position. 8 degrees Sagittarius is like the um, within the depths of the earth, new elements are being formed. The alchemical fire, which both purifies and transforms the very substance of man's inner life, right? It's psychic gestation. So there's something quite in the spiritual background, in the collective unconscious, something that you may not actually be able to really tap into unless you are in the 12th house, where it all kind of, you find yourself maybe like socially isolated. Perhaps you are feeling alone, because that's what happens in the 12th house. You find yourself because you have to surrender yourself to what is. And a lot of times that comes through hospitalization, or like living in an ashram, or prison, stuff like that, where it all comes to the end of a cycle. I feel like that this sextile, really kind of sets the stage in general for a very friendly influence, right? And there's something about what you can kind of feel into at the maybe socially unconscious level, about what you can return to in a moment, right? When all seems lost, right? And I think that that's going to influence more of your mental patterns in that moment of something that is developing under the surface, right? That psychic gestation. And maybe it's good for socializing. Usually Mercury sextile Venus is good for socializing, especially with Venus in the 12th, but it might be much more of um, an opportunity to kind of resolve conflict, or break down barriers. And it might be something you are just working with for yourself, right? Maybe just tapping into that spiritual sense of, no matter what, there is this fire that's always burning. Maybe that kind of gives you a sense mentally about the resource that you have, which is this kind of infinite divine flame. But maybe it comes through maybe more of a social concern with, the relationships, the societal level. I'm not, Venus in the 12th house, the value and worth of these relationships at a transcendental level is much more important. And in Libra, like I said, she's clearing the decks. But part of that means that it's clearing the decks, right? So the things that you relied upon, even if the relationships aren't balanced, right? They're getting cleared away too. And I think that's almost harder than just, becoming aware of the things that are wrong, or just, you know what I mean? Like, even if you know that they're not balanced in relationship dynamics are not balanced, Venus will not let you know in Libra. She will not let you know. Like, there is a karma here that has to be addressed, as uncomfortable as it is. But in this moment, it's like, oh, there's always something at this, there's that eternal fire that's always there, no matter what is changing or ending or whatever, in terms of relationship, and in terms of what is what is the world around you. That's the other thing about Mercury in the second house. I mean, second house is the world around you. So I think that's an important moment right after this new moon, especially if you kind of popped off and you're like, wait a minute, I need to kind of reconsider, or things just did not turn out the way you anticipated, and something unexpected came out of nowhere, or you pushed the issue because something changed, and you acted erratically or kind of oddly because you just have this primal urge to like release something. That Mercury sextile Venus is a good moment after this. Now, as we continue on here, Mars and the Sun are well on their way to becoming conjunct, and we will deal with that as we go through here. and they both in turn are going to have an inconjunct, a quincunx with the North Node in Aries, the sixth house. And so, whatever it is that you are, the structural knowledge of who you are that you become very identified with, your capacity to have a knowing of this structural knowledge, it's like being like having X-ray vision about yourself, or you yourself have that X-ray vision about you or your relationships. All that's fine and good. The quincunx, or the inconjunct with the North Node in your sixth house of Aries, is that even having that capacity, even being able to project that part of yourself out into the world that you're like, I can see down all the structural knowledge, there's still an adjustment that needs to be made at a soul level that is bringing it back to something very simple, which is you got to keep trying. And just because you fail once doesn't mean that you shouldn't try again, or that you don't want your faith and your capacity to, experience the fulfillment of yourself and desires in the world. And I say that very loosely because that's what we're here to do, is to be human in this vessel. And I just don't buy the, I just don't buy it that the whole thing is a trap. I think there are aspects of it that are absolutely a trap, but I don't think the whole thing is yet a trap. I think that's the eighth sphere is the trap, if you're into Steiner's work at all. But this this quincunx with the moon and Mars in Scorpio over here to the sixth house, I think that's a moment of adjustment. It's just like, okay, you have this capacity to have, access to the structural knowledge of what's going on within yourself, but you don't want to lose that drive of always new potentials that you can bring forward. Like it's not cast in stone. You have to fulfill the cycle, but there's always that possibility for new creative potential. And that's something that the Scorpio person really has to work at, right? Is like reestablishing who they are, who we are, because it's so easy to just, like I said, sublimate the ego out the gate and not even put yourself in it, or not be aware of who you are. That's the other thing too. And I think the Chiron aspect has been a big sticking point here for Scorpio people, because they're just not, my guess is that it's always really hard. The retrograde is going to be, has been difficult and kind of allows us to kind of push it under the rug a little bit. But this will come out a lot more when Venus is opposite Chiron and when these two come into conjunction. But that's later down the road. So, but to see the Scorpio in conjunct, right? And what do? You have to make adjustment. You have to make some sort of internal adjustment, because you can't force the outer adjustment. You can't force the square peg into the round hole. Doesn't matter how many times you try to push it in there. So something has to adjust in order for you to reach that point, even if it's just to be like, this doesn't fit, but you have to adjust yourself within here. And so whatever it is, it's going to be the ultimate inconjunct, the first house and the sixth house. So that's going to be also midweek. And then Mars comes in. Mars, right after that, Mars and the Sun come into a trine with Neptune. And we talked about Neptune, of course, in terms of being in this fifth house for the Scorpio people, and the ideal fantasy of who they are being performed out in the world. And with Neptune, that's very easy, and it can be so beautiful and transcendent, and very spiritual, right? In terms of that fifth house expression, like you yourself are one with everything, and that comes out in how you express yourself. But that also comes out in how you express yourself in ways that can be fantastical or delusional, and that's part of the Neptune, right? It's all there, right? It's Neptune doesn't make a distinction between what is right or wrong. There is no duality with Neptune. It's all dissolved down into oneness. So when we have the Sun and Mars each trine Neptune coming into the 17th of, which is next Friday. Now, this stimulates a lot of creativity. It increases your sensitivity to your environment. There is a lot, especially with Mars, very strong magnetic attractiveness, sultry charm. This is a great time for a romantic romance. Just be aware, especially with Neptune retrograde. I think things are a lot clearer with that, and sexual encounters, right? You yourself with Mars here, if you were a Scorpio person, this is going to be intensely compassionate with your sexual encounters. It's very spiritual. You will attract a less aggressive, more spiritually inclined partner if you're dating. And Scorpio, I would say this is really the case for you guys, as long as you're being realistic about dating, because that's the fifth house, right? And Neptune is not real. There's no realism with Neptune. It's glamour and fantasy and a film over things, right? So it's not a high energy transit to motivate you, um, but you should be motivated to express your creativity. And it's a really good time to get more in touch with subtle vibrational energies that influence your creativity. This is a great opportunity here midweek. Like, you can see that there is this really intense moment with the new moon. We could really find ourselves acting out, but then Scorpio, you have all these opportunities to like take your intense energy that is you and funnel it into things that are really creative, inspirational, sensual, part of a community spirit. It's not aggressive, but you can draw on strong spiritual courage. When it comes to all of those incredible Scorpio traits that are just so driven to be more, and to merge, right? And communion is communion is communion. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. There's spiritual courage. You can win battles now through acts of kindness, right? With Mars trine Neptune. There is a lot of potential here, Scorpio. And then you have the Sun trine Neptune, which increases your sensitivity, increases your empathy for other people. You may be urged to help others. You gain a more profound and broader understanding of your place in the world. And 25 degrees, your capacity to see through down to the foundation or root structure of any relationship or social situation is going to be really useful as as Neptune is basically purging all of the perversity out of the spiritual flow here. That's what 25 degrees of Pisces is, the purging of the priesthood, right? Whatever that means to you, it's a pretty strong torrent of energy. And the Sun trine Neptune here is you gain a more profound and broader understanding of your place in the world. I would say definitely for you, Scorpio, because your place in the world, the Sun in your sign, and seeing like, oh, this is where I belong, as aspects of how you've performed yourself are just getting swept away in the torrent of the water from, the dam is dissolving because of Neptune, and it purges all of the impurities away. So whatever's going on in relationship land, whatever those relationships are, there is a lot of guidance and learning there, because it's helping the Scorpio person to really allow this cleansing of themselves and their past to really take hold, I would say. And artistic and creative talents are really highlighted for the Scorpio people right now. It's an excellent time to start those types of projects with the Sun trine Neptune. Just remember that Neptune's retrograde. That's all I would say. That it's a little bit more, there's more realism and kind of like reality here, especially with Saturn too. But it enables you to work hard to succeed, right? There's and promoting your interest in groups and socializing and partnership. This is a really good, Monday is crazy, but like Wednesday into Thursday into Friday, even into Saturday when the Sun is conjunct Mars, this brings a lot of energy and initiative still, which has to be burnt constructively. So that's the other thing. You have to have an outlet here, for truly an outlet of self here, with the Sun conjunct Mars in Scorpio right now. So, and this is on next Saturday. Remaining unaware of this energy can lead to accidents and aggression and temper tantrums. So this is going to come up too. There's a lot of assertiveness and initiative for starting new projects. So the other thing about the Sun and Mars in a trine to Neptune is that if there's like a false self happening here in terms of performance, that's just going to reinforce it and reinforce possibly the reality of that when it's much more of a fantasy. I would still say that the retrograde of Neptune is probably helping in this way. I hope, in terms of like, you have to be willfully ignorant or just so deeply embedded that you can't see. But it's the Sun and Mars and then them coming together too. This is where a high degree of assertiveness and initiative is ideal for starting a new project, but an inflated ego should be contained if working with others at this time, right? So, and people may be feeling threatened and dominated, and they react with aggression. So there's that spike again in that Scorpionic, especially with Mars, to just be like, meh, right? To attack, to try to gain power over. And your muscles are primed to act on instinct when the adrenaline kicks in. So, finding a constructive way to release this energy, Scorpio, is going to be very, very important, because the sex drive will be through the roof. Physical activity is preferred, but you got to make sure that you know exactly what you're doing if you do engage in sexual activity, and what that, I mean, there is baby making is fits the bill here, right? So be mindful of this energy, and if it's built up and not expressed properly, it's very damaging. So but I also feel like, wow, this initiative here to start things with the Sun and Mars conjunct for the Scorpio person is incredible. And so it's worth taking advantage if you are conscious of yourself. Now, the 20th is where we have our first quarter moon in Aquarius, right? So that 17th is Friday. So next weekend, when we go through the weekend, the moon will come into Aquarius and it will square the sun, while, Mars and the sun are still, in a pretty tight conjunction with each other. So that means the moon's going to square not only the sun, but it's going to square Mars at the same time as well. So what do we expect with that? Well, the degree, remember we talked about the very beginning, the T-square with Lilith, and that there's that ghost point down in Aquarius, which is ruled by Uranus and partially Saturn. When the moon is in a square to Mars and the sun, there will be a real conflict. There will be a real conflict, and it'll have a lot to do with who you are and where you belong. The quality of your family life. How you feel, your loyalties, right? And where your power is coming from, where your root system really lies, where your power stems from, because it's not from your identity. Your identity is, for Scorpio, is just what projects that sense of yearning. It's really the 4th house in Aquarius where you really tap into your actual power, which is social consciousness, right? And so there'll be a real conflict here. Now, the other thing that happens at this time is that the sun comes into these last degrees of Scorpio and makes sextile to Pluto. And we really haven't talked about Pluto, even though Pluto's one of your other planetary rulers. And so after the moon squares the sun, by the time we get to the 21st, it will have, passed its sextile. It'll be in a sextile with Pluto. Pluto in your 3rd house, just destroying all perception. When you have the sun sextile Pluto, it brings significant soul growth, where changes and new opportunities increase your power and ability to reform your life for the better. This moment is going to be very important for the Scorpio person, in particular in terms of your immediate environment and your perception, right? And there is significant soul growth that's going to happen when you feel driven to get ahead, as the intense and transforming nature of Pluto, so this is coming from astrologyking.com, helps you to push through to achieve your goals, right? And what are your goals? Well, your goals are to have yourself forgiven in some ways, so that you can, really extract the true power of communion with a divine source or a higher self, right? Which is that your sins can be forgiven and that your soul can be cleansed in some ways, right? The intercession is where the sun is in Scorpio. Maybe you are the one forgiving or interceding on someone's behalf, and that is part of how this is expressed in your immediate reality. But I would say that this moment here is, relationships get really intense, but in a good way. This is going to be very healing. There's just going to be so much disruption in relationship land, Scorpio, whatever those relationships are, that are going to require you to, take full advantage of these moments, right? So relationships get more intense, bonding and deeper meaning come through a greater understanding of the psychological makeup of the relationship. And there's a lot of self-confidence that should be very high during this time as you enjoy more power and authority and actual power. And you don't have to take it from others. It's truly generated as a result of your projection of self into the relationship. And so this is a great time to transform your life. So while there is this real strong, there will be a crisis moment, but then you have this that's just like, oh, this is a great time to transform myself in relation to my changing perceptions, right? And find deeper meaning in all areas of life that's going to stay, right? This is a very important moment on the 20th, after and while the moon is in a square to Mars and the sun, right? Because it's about where you belong, where your loyalties are. But there's something about perception that is so changing so fundamentally that's going to have such an impact on your emotional sense of where you belong, because those perceptions are going through big change. And then Mars sextiles Pluto, which is just another level of tremendous energy. These two rule your sign. So when they come together in this very harmonious type of transit, there is so much it's so favorable for tackling things like complex projects and situations that seem too difficult, right? There may be some serious mental reframing here, as a result of your willingness to actually go into the deeper aspects of a situation, to really explore the shadow of what relationships you've been in, and to come out of it with and having the endurance and the stamina to really actually achieve these goals. Maybe it is healing of relationship. Maybe it's healing of you, right? Maybe it is about changing how you enter relationship or the type of relationships you get into. And again, when you have Mars sextile Pluto, the sexual energy is off the charts, right? So it's not an aggressive transit so much as it gives you that adrenaline and that willpower to stand up if you're threatened or provoked, right? And very strong instinct, staying focused. Something deep inside is driving you. There's primal kind of survival, but it's not a negative thing that's destructive. When you're sextile Pluto, it's all of the powerful things about Pluto and Mars giving you all this energy to achieve something, right? Your desires. Then the sun comes into Sag, and then we begin this process of everything squaring Saturn. So a couple days after this, when we're pretty much getting to Thanksgiving here in the US, right? This is where it's going to kind of pick back up again with Saturn and the brick wall. So a sun square Saturn it just presents tests and challenges. This is going to be a difficult thing to have on Thanksgiving Day when everybody's getting together, to have Sun square Saturn, because there's a lot of feeling of restriction. Your ego may suffer. You should not expect to feel lighthearted or happy because of coming under pressure. There's just going to be a lot of problems here, I think, in general. And coming under pressure, people are going to be at each other. You have to show patience, determination, a strong work ethic in this sense. And just because you have a sense about who you are doesn't mean the world around you is going to conform to the performance of that, Scorpio. And that's where you're going to get pissed. And you're going to feel this square and the challenge to your ego. And that's going to trigger you in different ways. It's a test of character. That's just all there is to it with a Sun square Saturn. And it really is about you, since its Sun is in Scorpio. You may justifiably feel that you're being hard done by now and may experience rejection, isolation, sadness, discouragement, bad luck. Yes, that's very possible. The sooner you get to the hard work and get it done, the sooner your self-confidence will return, right? Don't get falling into the gloomy feelings and the guilt, the restriction, all of the negativity that goes with this transit. There's something to learn here. But you can't get caught up in the feels around it, because it has nothing to do with that, right? It's more about the way that, when you become identified with the world around you, it can be difficult. right? And that's what happens when the sun comes in the second house. You start to personally identify with your resources and think you are that resource, right? You think you are the Sagittarius. And this mutable square with Saturn is just going to be one of those really difficult bruises to the ego, right? So just don't identify, be aware that you're identifying what with your resource as if it's you, and you have to remember that it's a resource. You probably won't receive much praise or recognition with a Sun square Saturn. So you don't want to get caught up in that as a stumbling block, right? You don't want to get caught up in like, oh, I'm not getting, nobody realizes what I've done or how important I am or whatever. Whatever it is, you might make the whole Thanksgiving meal and nobody appreciates it or says anything, that kind of stuff. Don't get caught up in it, right? You don't want to get caught up in it. And this is also when Venus is going to be opposite Chiron as well. So that's just going to bring up a whole host of issues. And then the moon comes into Aries, and then the Mars squares Saturn leading up to, oh my gosh, leading up to the full moon, right? So at this point, the moon has come into your seventh house. Scorpio has moved through your sixth house, and you become very sensitive to what needs to be done here. And then comes into the seventh house, and you become very sensitive to the nature of your relationships, while Mars also squares Saturn. So you thought that the sun was bad. This is even more so for you, Scorpio, because frustration, inhibition, your desires and needs may grow more robust, but it's harder to express them because, wow, Saturn's in your fifth house of expression. The harder you pursue your goals, the more of a resistance you will face, right? So, and especially in terms of performing yourself. This is not a winning transit, my friends, and I hope that you've already started to take that into account with Mercury square Saturn, because it's really set the tone for this. This is not a winning transit. Authority figures and superiors may put you down, restrict your ambitions, generally stop you from achieving what you want. And that's not a good or a bad thing. It just is. It may be that general circumstances prevent your progress. This is Mars square Saturn, right? Risk-taking or bursts of energy will only worsen any problems. Well, Saturn's not going to really let you take any risks that are, Saturn in the fifth house is just like dad putting the foot down there. So you're grounded, right? You're grounded. Saturn in the fifth house is like you're grounded. This is not a good time for fighting or conquering new ground either. I think it's more of just like you're going to be really frustrated at this point, Scorpio, with these squares leading up to a full moon in your eighth house, which is in Gemini, when Mercury is in a square to Neptune. So let's look at that. And then I think we can call it a day here, my friends. Distort your thinking. Mercury square Neptune. Oh, my Lord. And the full moon in the full moon in Gemini, right? 5 degrees Gemini. A revolt. A revolutionary magazine asking for action. Oh, my Lord. Okay, and that's the full moon. And I would encourage you, Scorpio, to listen to the full moon forecast when it happens, just to get an idea of the transits coming after that. But Mercury square Neptune distorts thinking, confusing, complicating discussions, and business dealings. 25 degrees of Sagittarius is an interesting image. It's a fat little boy on a rocking horse, right? It's like going back and forth and be like, one day I'm going to be a big boy, and kind of anticipating the use of that rhythmic power as an adult, right? And so there's vitality because he's riding a horse, but it's a toy, right? And he's chubby, so he's still got all of his baby fat on him, right? So it's also building up the energy of the friction in order to actually create, but it's not quite there yet. And the square to Neptune over in the fifth house of creative expression, right? There's just so much distortion. And I think that, along with a full moon in the eighth house, Scorpio, keep in mind that if you are trying to use your logic as an asset, it has to be, I think you're going to be better off just seeing things very clearly in the realm of shared resources, power dynamics, the eighth house. I think you're going to be much better off just feeling and seeing and sitting with the full moon and what it's illuminating for you, as opposed to trying to think clearly about anything when it comes to you and how you express yourself, because it's in the relationship and the power dynamics that are created that is going to give you way more actual information about how to grow as a person than possibly how you're trying to rationalize it, or how you're trying to objectively look at something that has no objectivity whatsoever, which is Neptune and Pisces in the fifth house. So it's going to distort thinking. It confuses thinking. You are you suffer from lack of clarity and misrepresentation or misinterpretation. And it's really difficult to deal with important business matters, legal matters. When you're dealing with family and friends, with Mercury's in a square to Neptune, you have to stick to the basics, right? Your imagination and potential for deception in this area can lead to sticky situations. And I would say that the story that you are telling about yourself, the way you're performing yourself in these moments, Scorpio, is not going to be nearly as illuminating or clear as what the full moon in your eighth house is showing you, okay? So you're more, especially Mercury square Neptune, boy, this is where people get pulled back into the imagination and the confusing situations, and more susceptible to strange and extreme spiritual or religious views, to cult mentality and theories, conspiracy theories. You need to protect yourself against the loan sharks and the cult leaders and the narcissists and the psychic vampires, all of that stuff with Mercury square Neptune. And this is about you, Scorpio. You have to protect yourself from these confusing and complicating discussions about yourself, right? About how you perform yourself and what is yours. And because the full moon is going to be so much more illuminating. And if you're not ready for that, you will just kind of fall back into this and just let yourself succumb to the fantasy, right? It's going to be very interesting and quite difficult, but you have all the tools now, Scorpio, and certainly other astrologers and other channels. All the content that you personally find yourself drawn to are going to fill in the gaps for your personal story. But Scorpio, if you are ready to obey your own conscience and to see the guidance in your change in relationship status, whatever that is, as an opportunity for Venus to clear the decks of your karma, to set the stage for you to assert yourself and to bring yourself into new creative potential when it comes to relationships, I feel like that you are going to actually be able to discover your true inherent value and worth in relationships. They got to be the right relationships, though. And I think that all of us, but especially the Scorpio people, like, we're going to be the avatars of this situation. So it'll be directly into identity and who we are in relationship that's going to show this. So good luck. Good luck. So normally I would offer you opportunities for your own personal reading, but they're not open right now. When they are, you'll know. I will make sure to announce it, or you'll be able to access a booking option through my website. So that's all in the description box below. Telegram is the main social media. And certainly if you're interested in weekly astrology, group calls, private Telegram group for people, that's all subscriber benefits through Subscribestar. So Scorpio, good luck out there. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you to everybody who is watching. I appreciate you all so very much. And I will see you on the next video. Peace.